I'm Nancy Proctor, and I thought I would just start off by introducing the Peale. If you've never heard of the Peale in Baltimore before, you can be forgiven because it has actually been closed, more or less abandoned really, for the past 20 years. So in addition to renovating the historic building, what we're trying to do is get it back onto everybody's radar, make it part of the cultural discourse of Baltimore and beyond. So I really appreciate this opportunity to share the history and the future of our organization with you. And I hope that some of our learnings will be useful to you. I'll just start off by quickly introducing the building behind me. You might be able to see in my my background here, is the Peale in Baltimore. Today, we see ourselves as a home for Baltimore stories and also a laboratory for museum practice, really a teaching museum, a place where, precisely because we have both a very long history, but are actually today a startup, we have the ability to be very nimble and very experimental. And so a big part of what we want to do is share our learnings with communities like yours. So although I will spend just a few minutes here introducing the Peale and sharing some slides, I think Udi and I would like for this to be very much a conversation where hopefully your questions will get answered, and I'd love the opportunity to learn more about what you all are doing as well, in the spirit of you always learn more when you're in conversation with somebody. Okay, so with that, I will start sharing my screen and just show you a few images here. Let's see. So as I said, are you seeing the Peale, the facade of the Peale now, Udi?
Yes,
okay?
yes,
Okay,
perfect,
great.
yeah.
All right, fantastic. All right, so this is, as I said, the Peale in Baltimore. It is actually the very first purpose-built museum building in the Western Hemisphere. It was opened in 1814 by this gentleman, Rembrandt Peale, from the Peale family of artists. In fact, that family is often referred to as the first family of American art because Rembrandt's father, Charles Willson Peale, whom you see here in a self-portrait from 1822, actually was both an artist and the first museum founder in the United States. He started a museum that was really an outgrowth of his studio, hosted initially in his home, and then he moved to rented premises. But he really embodied the modern idea of the museum as a public educational institution. So against this history of museums really having started as princely collections, cabinets of curiosities, in which the wealthy elite would show off their treasures to presumably mainly other wealthy elite, Charles Willson Peale was fairly radical in arguing that museums should be public educational institutions, that they were there for the public good, that in fact educational institutions like museums would be essential to the young United States and to preserving its democracy. He campaigned for most of his life with his friends who included George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, many of the founding fathers of the United States, for the government to support his and other museums. He never got a penny out of them. That remains a challenge to this day in the US to get the federal governments to support culture and museums. But nonetheless, he really put forward this idea that the museum was for everyone. Now, you know, in the 18th and 19th centuries, everyone was actually a fairly limited concept. It was focused very much on the European descendants, the white population of the United States, and people who had a certain amount of means anyway. So in his self-portrait of, as he called it, the artist in his museum in Philadelphia, Charles Willson Peale is showing us the kinds of people he expected to come to his museum. We see a Quaker lady in the foreground expressing what was seen as one appropriate response to visiting a museum, which is wonder. We see a gentleman educating a young man in the middle ground, and then in the background another gentleman, all white of course, contemplating and learning from the collections. The concept of museum, as you may well be aware then, was very encyclopedic. So Charles Willson Peale exhibited everything from his and his family's portraits of famous Americans to European fine art from the masters, to natural history. So we see in the cubbies around there stuffed birds, which were often displayed in dioramas, creating really an early kind of immersive experience of collection objects, to see objects in their the context of an habitat. And also behind the red curtain, which Charles Willson Peale is raising to welcome us to his museum, you see a large skeleton. That is actually a mastodon skeleton, the first prehistoric animal to have been exhibited in a museum anywhere in the world. And we'll come back to that story in just a moment. I want to chat for just a moment more about the Peale family. In addition to his views on museums as public educational institutions, Charles Willson Peale was fairly unusual in that he was a real champion for women's education. He taught all of his children to paint, including his daughters, and they were all named after famous artists. So as I mentioned before, our founder was Rembrandt Peale, his older brother was Raphael, his younger brothers were Titian and Rubens, and the girls were given female artist names like Angelica Kaufman Peale, Sophonisba Anguissola Peale, etc. So there was no question what Charles Willson Peale wanted his children to grow up to be. There was another young man in the household as everyone was growing up in Philadelphia named Moses Williams. He was not a biological child of Charles Willson Peale. In fact, he was the child of an enslaved couple who were traded to Charles Willson Peale in exchange for a couple of portraits that Peale had painted. He was born to that couple while they were part of the Peale household. This is a part of the Peale family history that we're just starting to dig into a little bit more deeply, and it's very interesting because, in fact, slavery was illegal in Philadelphia at this time, and Charles Willson Peale was actually on the city council that outlawed slavery. But there were many kind of loopholes and kind of riders on that law. So in fact, Charles Willson Peale was responsible for the housing, the upbringing of Moses Williams until he was 27. So even though his parents left the Peale household when he was 8 years old, Moses Williams remained in a sort of an indentured status with the Peale family until he was 27. And he was not taught to paint as were the biological children in the Peale family, but he was taught to operate a physiognotrace, which was a sort of a machine for cutting silhouettes like this one. And he also became a very accomplished silhouette cutter in his own right. This is actually a silhouette understood to be of Moses Williams, cut by Raphael Peale, the eldest of the Peale children, who was Moses's contemporary. Moses set up at the back of Charles Willson Peale's museum in Philadelphia, offering as souvenirs from your museum visit, you could have your silhouette cut. He made enough money from that to be able to buy a home and marry the Peale family's cook, who was an Irish indentured servant, and actually did very well, had 2 children until photography was invented, which sadly put him and many other silhouette cutters out of business as the new cheap way to get a likeness of someone. So another piece of the history I wanted to come back to was that around the mastodon. In the early 1800s, Charles Willson Peale heard that a farmer in upstate New York in the Hudson Valley area had dug up some very large bones. And he went up there with his sons and got permission to excavate the site, and in fact extracted enough bones to recreate 2 complete mastodon skeletons. One was exhibited in the Philadelphia Museum and the other in the Baltimore Museum. So this is the skeleton that was exhibited at the Peale in Baltimore, and was in fact a major draw to get people to come and buy tickets. You paid extra to see the mastodon. It was large enough that a table for four could have a dinner underneath it. It's today, I mean, it's really largely a reconstruction, but is still a really important part of museum history as, you know, the first prehistoric animal ever to have been exhibited. The Peale family was interested not just in ancient history and natural history and fine art, but also in new technologies. So another way that Rembrandt Peale got people to come to his museum and buy tickets and therefore support the ongoing operations was through lighting his galleries at night using the new technology of gaslight chandeliers. Now, up until this period, really the only technologies that had been available throughout human history for creating light were obviously, you know, fires, burning wood, reeds, rushes. There was some oil lamps. In the early 19th century, there started being some experiments with various gases, argon, for example, but the first one that really took off as a safe and affordable alternative to candles and torches was gaslight. And Rembrandt Peale adopted a kind of a recent innovation in this technology that made it not so smelly and dangerous as coal burning to produce gas, and used that to light his museum at night through gaslight chandeliers like the one that you see being demonstrated in this lithograph here. He in fact manufactured the gas by burning pitch in the backyard of the museum, and it said that it was such a miraculous light that whenever he would illustrate in the local paper that, oh, I'm sorry, I see I lost an image there somehow. Sorry, let me just go back. He would put ads in the local paper indicating that you could come to see the museum illuminated. And if people couldn't afford the price of admission, they would nonetheless gather in Holiday Street in front of the museum and gaze up at the windows because they'd never seen such bright light. Such was the quality of gaslight. The people of the city of Baltimore were so fascinated by this that Rembrandt Peale and his business partners were able to get a contract to provide a network of gas streetlights throughout the city of Baltimore in 1816, thereby founding what is still today our gas and electric company, Baltimore Gas and Electric. Of course, the electricity pit was added later on, but that company remains to this day one of the oldest continuously operating businesses in the world, and Baltimore is today known as Light City for having been the first of the cities in the United States to be lit by gas street lamps. This was a really transformative technology. I think it can be compared to the introduction of the smartphone, actually, in terms of how it changed the way that people then worked, because for the first time, it was actually quite safe to go out after dark to do whatever you wanted to do. Nonetheless, despite the draw of the mastodon and the gaslight, not to mention the collections and the exhibitions that Peale exhibited in his museum, he really struggled to make enough money to pay back his investors. And so in 1830, he decided to sell the museum to the city of Baltimore to use as their first city hall. Now, I don't have an image from 1830 when that transaction was made, but you can see in these photographs from the early 20th century that the role of the museum building as Baltimore's first city hall was commemorated on the facade of the building. When the new City Hall, as we call it, was built in 1875, the City Hall once again evacuated and left this building empty, and it started being used as male and female colored school number 1. We are now in the Reconstruction era after the end of the Civil War in the United States. Slavery has been outlawed, And for the first time, public schools are being built for the use of Black Americans. Among the very first schools built in Baltimore, the one housed at the Peale, which again was called Male and Female Colored School Number 1, was the only one, the first one, to offer a secondary school education. This was critically important because obviously without a high school degree, there were all sorts of careers that were not open to African Americans, and perhaps most importantly among them, the role of teacher. So it wasn't until the first class of students that had started at the school housed at the Peale graduated, that there could finally be Black teachers for Black students in the public school system in Baltimore. The school quickly outgrew the building. There was such a demand of students wanting to go through and get their degrees. So they fortunately got actually a new purpose-built school nearby by 1889. And that left the building empty once again. It started being used for manufacturing. This almost destroyed the interior of the building. And in fact, the city was thinking of tearing the whole thing down when in the 1920s, a group of citizens and journalists came together and convinced the city instead to preserve the building, recognizing its great importance in the history of the United States and the city, and not to mention the history of museums. So in 1930, the building was renovated for the first time and reopened as the first municipal museum for the city of Baltimore. The image on the right gives you a sense of what those interiors looked like at the time. And in fact, a lot of pieces from other buildings of a similar age in Baltimore had to be salvaged in order to renovate the building because it had been so kind of stripped on the inside. So for example, the marble floor that you see on the left was taken from the original Enoch Pratt Free Library, one of the first public libraries in the United States and still a critically important institution in the city of Baltimore today. In the back of the Peale, where the gas manufacturing had happened to feed the gas streetlights around the city, the architect of the renovations put in a little garden, which features some very important sculptural reliefs. The one that we're seeing in this image is actually now today the oldest still extant piece of architectural sculpture in the United States, created by the Italian sculptors Franzoni and Andrea, who did the sculpture on the original US Capitol, the one that was burned with the British invasion of 1812, hence why this piece, which had been made in Baltimore for a bank, is the oldest piece of architectural sculpture still in existence in the US. And it was transferred with the help of BGE to the Peale's garden as part of these 1930 renovations to preserve it when the original bank it was on was being torn down. Now, the Municipal Museum did a really important job of being the go-to place where people wanted to know about the history of Baltimore. And in fact, as early as the 1980s, began a very socially and community driven approach to exhibition design and telling the stories of Baltimore, very much a popular history approach, which is known today under terms like participatory or co-creation, co-curation. Those terms perhaps weren't used in the mid to late 1900s, as it were, but that was indeed a very kind of radical and innovative practice that was rooted at the Peale, just again in continuing its history of innovation. But unfortunately, in 1997, the city came upon some hard times, and a number of city-owned museums were shut down, including the Peale. Its collection was transferred to the nearby Maryland Historical Society, and the building was basically left empty and abandoned. So when I arrived 20 years later in 2017, this is what had happened to the garden. It had gotten so grown up. Inside, the building had started, the roof had started leaking. There was a lot of water damage. And just generally the whole place was in sore need of renovation. And a group of people had been working to save the building for some time, but decided that, of course, they needed to tell the funders of the renovation what the building would be used for. And so I was hired to give the building a new purpose. And we decided to really take the approach of being a museum of Baltimore stories, if you will, given that there is no physical collection left other than the building itself, and also recognizing that one of the challenges that Baltimore faces is that although it's one of the oldest cities in America, unfortunately, it's come to be known for a very small number of narratives that tend to be negative and, in fact, almost self-fulfilling as they get recycled on the evening news. And there's so much more to tell about Baltimore. It's an incredibly diverse city of more than 250 neighborhoods, has a long history of immigration and diversity. And so our role really is to help people, as we say, see Baltimore in a new light by making sure that all the voices and all the stories are included in its cultural record, so that it really is fully representative of the rich history and cultural diversity of the city. Fortunately, a lot of people believe in this mission, so we've had a number of volunteers and folks come by to help us do things like renovate that garden, so it's looking much better now. This is actually an architectural rendering. We've put in the staircase that you see there. We haven't put in the glass sidings yet, but as we continue the renovations, this back garden will become an indoor-outdoor cafe just off of our exhibition galleries. And now we're embarking, having finished the exterior renovations and stabilized the building and the garden, we're now embarking on the interior renovations. This is the room that staircase that you just saw in the garden goes up to. It's called the Picture Gallery. It's our largest assembly room, and it's lit from above by a natural light cupola. But does, unfortunately, as you can probably already detect in this photo, we've got a lot of water damage and signs of age that just need to be repaired. And most importantly, we need to add an elevator and other accessibility accommodations so that Baltimore's home for its stories can truly be accessed by everyone. So just to wrap up on that history, we want to combine, the best of the past with the most innovative ideas of the future. And I think one of the wonderful inspirations from 19th century and earlier museums that we've really embraced is that of the museum is not just a treasure house of culture where you go to see beautiful artworks and artifacts from the past, but actually a production house of culture. So a place where artists, creators, storytellers today find the support, the resources, and the platform that they need in order to continue to create culture, in order to tell the whole story of the city of Baltimore, and thereby write our future as well. So that's what I think we see happening in this painting here by the American artist Samuel F.B. Morse of the Gallery of the Louvre, is that it wasn't just a place to go and study art from the past, but a place where artists and others went to create the art of the future. And so this is kind of what we are, and obviously it's a very experimental project, so we're taking advantage of that too. As I said, to be a place, a laboratory where we can collaborate with other organizations, and including yours. I very much welcome you to reach out to me, and we'll see what kinds of things we can try and experiment in order to create new ways of being sustainable and inclusive museums going forward. So with that, I am going to stop sharing for a moment. I do have some other images that illustrate some of our programs that we can perhaps dip into if that turns out to be useful. But for now, I'm just going to stop and hand it back to Udi and see what kind of questions have come up.
Right. Okay, so until we have some questions from our participants, I wanted to ask you first, with all, coming back to 2020, אם אפשר לבקש ממי שמחובר אלינו לעשות מיוט בבקשה. Okay, so coming back to 2020, I understand that the whole project, you have a lot of projects of the renovations going on now, but still, how did the COVID-19 affect your museum? I mean, did it change anything in your activity? What did you have to, how did you respond to it? Nancy?
Yeah, well, it was huge, obviously. In addition to heading up the Peale, earlier this year, I was also co-chair of the MUSE-Web conferences. We had one that was supposed to happen in Los Angeles starting on March 31st. So we had less than 3 weeks to pivot to moving that entire conference online. And it's very interesting. I mean, I've been working with technology in museums for over 20 years, and nonetheless, it was a bit of a scramble to figure out how to move everything online, and also very eye-opening to realize that by not having done more online until now, we'd really been missing out on some large international audiences. I mean, of course, we had websites and, you know, did the occasional thing online, but as challenging as the pandemic has been and tragic, it's also been in a way good for us to be, you know, out of necessity forced to do more online, and we've really grown our online audiences exponentially. So one of the learnings that came out of moving the conference online was a rediscovery, if you will, of Second Life. Which is a platform I'd been aware of since it was launched back in the early 2000s, but I hadn't never really done very much with. We ended up working with Linden Labs and our friends at Virtual Ability, which is an organization that helps people with disabilities use virtual worlds, to create a conference, an online conference space for the MUSE-Web 20 conference. And I was very inspired by that and the success of that. So we have actually, again, working with those same partners, rebuilt the Peale in Second Life. Based on a digital model that originated with the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, as part of a website that they created for the U.S. celebrations of the War of 1812. It's a 3D digital map, and this is browser-based, actually. You don't need to go into Second Life or any special software to see it, but if you go to earlybaltimore.org, you can actually see the Peale as it would have looked circa 1815. And they gave us that digital model. Linden Labs, their moles as they call them, built it out just with extraordinary accuracy on the inside, and also some interesting innovations and additions that weren't possible in the physical museum. And then Emmy Capolini with Virtual Ability did this incredible job of adding the exhibits to the inside of the Peale and helping us, in fact, install a temporary exhibition, which had been slated for the physical building and then had to be moved online again due to the pandemic. We actually were able to host that exhibition in Second Life, thanks to you know, these resources and this expertise that helped us kind of recreate everything. And what's interesting is the Peale was closed for 20 years. It really fell off of the cultural map of Baltimore, and people didn't even really think about it anymore. So growing audiences has been a huge priority for us. And even in a really good year, we would only have about 4,000 physical visitors to the museum in Baltimore. But the opening week of the Peale in Second Life, thanks to, in no small part, thanks to support and promotion by Linden Lab, we had over 12,000 people come to join us either in Second Life in the Peale there, or through one of our programs that was based at the Peale in Second Life through YouTube. So that is exponential, obviously, and it really, again, reminded me of the breadth and the size of the audiences that exist online, and how important it is to program for them too, and not just think of the museum as a destination with our primary object being getting people through the doors and as it were, ticket sales at the door.
Sure. Now I have a question from Einat Sharon. Obviously, I think you've answered a bit of that, but she asked, can you elaborate about the digital team and your work in this field? So, I mean, if you can tell us a little more about your digital experience, digital strategy, how you, yeah, please.
Yeah, so again, this is a startup, and we've been bootstrapping from the beginning. So when I started at the Peale in 2017, I was really the only employee. Almost everything that we've done has been done through partnerships and collaborations, and that's a really important principle for the way we work. We've never wanted to be top down, you know, that all of the programs and exhibitions come out of my head or some other expert or curator's brain, but that it really comes grassroots up from the community. So that allowed us right from the beginning to punch way above our weight, because we weren't just depending on the paid staff of the Peale to do everything. We did a lot through collaborations and partnerships. Over time, we've been able to add people to the team, but pretty much everybody's part-time. I mean, we're still living very much hand-to-mouth. Every penny we spend, I'm raising with the board pretty much. And so most people, although we pay everybody, we don't do very much at all with unpaid volunteers, much less with unpaid interns. We don't do that at all. But we pay everybody, but not great. So most people have a day job, and in a way, there's been an advantage there too, in that they're bringing expertise from those other roles into the team. We're now about 12 people. So that's pretty rapid growth over the past 3 years. My background obviously is in digital. Our chief experience officer, David London, has a lot of experience with web development, but he's also a curator and a historian and a researcher and a performer. He's a magician. So again, it's this kind of ecumenical approach to having people wear a lot of hats and thereby bring a lot of different perspectives to the role, rather than trying to silo people in terms of you only do digital and you only do curation. I think one of the things that we found is there's a lot of power in working across those disciplines and silos, just as we saw, you know, in the early museums. The Peales would never have thought that you had to put the natural history and the science stuff in one museum and the art in a different museum. There was a richness and a dialogue that was very productive of putting everything together, and we find that in terms of our team as well.
Right. I have another question from Neely Perry. She's asking, actually, you've started talking about this. Can you explain a little about the museum's business model and how was it affected, or would it change because of the COVID-19?
Yeah. So yeah, that's been a really important part, obviously, of being a laboratory. Is I don't think that the existing business models in museums are very sustainable. They lead to all sorts of problems of exclusion yeah, kind of a perpetuating colonialism and all sorts of, and racism and all sorts of things, that problems that are really endemic to the history of museums, certainly in the United States. So one of the things that we adopted as a principle early on, and it was, again, as much out of necessity, but also because we wanted to try new business models, was that all of the programs have to be self-sustaining. So that put us in a good position, in a sense, when the pandemic hit, that if we didn't run a program, it wasn't going to cost us anything. And we have carried a cash reserve every year since we started. We started with $40,000 in the bank, and we continue to keep about that amount in the bank going forward. So we had a cushion. And then fortunately, you know, people really believe in what we're doing. So our funders, both individuals and foundations, really stepped up to help us out. And so we've been able to weather the storm pretty well. But the thing that we hadn't experimented with until now is really to understand what kind of money could be earned online. And what we found is that the ticket prices probably don't, you can charge more for an in-person event than you can online, but we found we can get up to $20, $25 a ticket for a special event. That obviously reduces attendance. So in certain cases, it's better to go for a much lower price point in order to have a larger number of people participate. But of course, then along there's, well, how do you support technologically an audience of hundreds as opposed to under 100, which I think is the typical Zoom limit. And so we've spent a lot of time trying out different platforms to figure out what would work, what would be really easy that people didn't have to do a software install. And, you know, have kind of gotten to something that seems to work pretty well. As a result, we've had some organizations hire us to host their online events. So in essence, we've become a platform online in the same way that we were in the physical world, where people could bring, from the community, would bring their programs, their exhibitions, their storytelling workshops and things, and hold them at the Peale. We're able to offer that same sort of space in the digital world, if you will, to host events. So for example, we hosted the launch of the suffrage map that was recently created by Towson University for the National Park Service. And so it's nice to see that we can do that in both the physical and the digital worlds. And we're really looking forward to the Peale in Second Life as being another sort of space where it's easy to imagine not every organization is going to want to do what we did and build out their whole museum in Second Life, but they might want a cultural space to host events there, because there is an enormous audience in Second Life of people who love museums, who go to museums and historic sites in Second Life. And so it's kind of crazy not to meet those people where they are and bring our organizations to them. But I think, you know, the reliance on philanthropy remains very strong. And the innovation, if you will, there in the business model is not thinking about it as the usual kind of sales pitch of, you know, history is important, art is important, this building is important, so you should give us money to preserve it, but to really demonstrate the value that we're giving back to Baltimore's community. And that obviously is a very compelling reason for people who want to support not just an institution, but the whole city and beyond to give. So a really important thing that we've launched this year, our artistic director, the artist Jeffrey Kent, has pioneered a workforce development program that works with mainly young people from marginalized communities to teach them how to do art handling, gallery preparation, art installation, you know, exhibition work. And those are skills that are well paid. They're meaningful, important jobs that are creative and, you know, really contribute. But you can do them without having a college degree, which is often beyond the financial reach of people from economically underserved communities. So that's something that we're really excited about, and that has attracted a lot of interest, and that, you know, funds our ongoing operations. Interestingly enough, the other thing that we've introduced in terms of our membership model that has made a huge difference is the ability for people to purchase a membership for a storyteller. And then those storytellers get a whole range of services from us, from promoting their programs and their work to helping them fundraise for their own programs. And it's a $50 a year membership, which a lot of people want to sponsor a storyteller. And that money, again, it supports our core mission and our core operations. So those, you know, it's always going to be a mix. I don't think there will ever be one silver bullet that's going to, you know, suddenly make museums sustainable. But it's about being nimble and willing to experiment with various things and not get too diluted or stuck in the models that worked in the past. As we've seen throughout the history of capitalism, you know, that's how big companies fall. They think, well, we always made money this way, so we always will. And clearly, if the pandemic's taught us anything, those truths are not self-evident anymore.
Right. I have another question now from one of the participants regarding insights you might have regarding success of online activities. What works best?
Well, I'd say the first thing is it works best to ask the people you're trying to work with, in terms of for whom you're creating these activities, and ideally with whom you're creating these activities. Ask them what works. So one thing that we became aware of very early on was that the pandemic meant a huge part of the very population whose voices and stories we were trying to amplify didn't have internet access. With the libraries and the schools and the internet cafes closed, a lot of people in Baltimore, didn't have internet access at home or a computer. So we had to think very quickly, how do we bridge that digital divide and make sure that those voices aren't left out? So we worked in a number of partnerships with Libraries Without Borders to be part of technology kits that were delivered to 200 households around the city to help them and their neighborhoods get connected. We also have a storytelling ambassador, Daisy Brown, who goes out and sees people out on the streets sitting on their front stoops and asks, can I take your picture? Can I share your story? So we're able to collect stories kind of through this boots on the ground way as well. So that's, I think, a really important thing, is to be aware of whom are you trying to serve and what platforms are available to them. And it may be, the answer may be no digital platforms. So you have to come up with workarounds like those. Of course, pre-pandemic, we would just go physically en masse to community centers or have people at the Peale if they didn't have internet access. So it's taken a little bit of extra work at the moment to overcome that barrier. For the audiences who are online, we started off doing an early survey, what times of day, what days of the week, what do you like Zoom, do you like Teams, do you like, none of the above, and we found out what worked for people, and so we started scheduling according to that. We're actually about to reissue that survey because we think that things have changed. And it's important to continue to evolve where we are. The principle always being we need to be where the people are that we're trying to serve, and recognize that there is a huge diversity in those. I remember early on in the pandemic, there was a lot of people started doing virtual tours, and then there was a sort of a backlash from museum professionals on Twitter anyway, saying, oh, virtual tours are boring, nobody likes them. Well, I'll tell you, we haven't found that at all. People love virtual tours. They love lectures. They love history lectures. We get more attendance now that we're doing those things online than we ever got in the physical building. So those have worked very well for us, but we're a museum that specializes in the stories of history and place-based storytelling. So tours make a lot of sense for us. We have had success with workshops, everything from how to be inclusive online to strategies using humor to get through the pandemic. And we've just experimented with a lot of different things. We have found that there's a certain benefit, I suppose, of making programs free and then people pay what they can. You won't have a huge number of people donating that way, but again, if your audience is large enough, you make enough to cover your costs. We've added ASL, sign language interpretation, as well as CART captioning as standard to all of our programs. So that, that costs us about $350 per program to provide those services, but it's important because it makes the content not only available to audiences today who wouldn't be able to come, but also then it's recorded and it's accessible in its archival version too. So we do see, that long tail effect that we've known about from the beginning of the .com boom, that there is a long-term value in investing in building a digital library of content that you can use ongoing.
All right. One more question I have from Dorit. She's asking regarding if you offer unique visiting programs for schools, for elementary school weekly or monthly basis? Has it changed since the COVID-19?
Yeah, so that's been tough for us actually, because yes, we've done a lot with schools, a lot with local universities, also with local high schools. One of the ways that we want to tell the story of the Peale as male and female colored school number one is to connect it to the history of racism and segregation in Baltimore public school system. So starting, you know, from obviously the segregated schools of the 19th century through the segregated schools of the 20th century and into the de facto segregated schools of today. And so we've asked contemporary school students to share their stories, to kind of make that history relevant and give it a contemporary context. Now, so what we did to trying to continue to work with those audiences today is we actually brought onto our team two educators, Noreen Smith, who's an educational specialist and community outreach activist, and Maya, I'm suddenly blanking on Maya's last name, who is our social media curator. Sorry, it'll come to me in a moment. Who is also by day a Baltimore City school teacher, and Maya Wilson, sorry. And she is able to kind of advise us on how to reach those audiences, and Noreen and also Daisy Brown, actually our storytelling ambassador, are actually planning now a whole set of community outreach activities that will help us tell the stories of Lexington Market, which is a key kind of site, a historic market in Baltimore that's being redeveloped today, and of contemporary civil rights sites. So I think one of the things that they've kind of identified is that the contemporary civil rights movement that's happening in the US and around the world, of course, is of critical importance and interest to local young people. And so again, we're trying to meet them where they are, the things that they're interested in order to make sure that we're engaging their voices and their stories in what we're doing. What I think we could do a lot better is directly keying our programming to the school curriculum. And that's something that, again, with Maya and Noreen's and Daisy's help, we will continue to develop, but we're still very much at the beginning there. And I'd love to learn from you all, you know, what has worked for you.
Just two things. First of all, we have at least two more questions from our viewers. If anyone wants to ask it, you know, yes, just to unmute himself and ask his question. We'll do it in, let's say, I suggest in about 5 minutes. I have one question from Sharon Yanai asking if you have any insight regarding best practices, how to transfer offline activity to run it online. To switch from offline to online.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I think you kind of have to work activity by activity because there isn't kind of a recipe that works for everything. But you know, we found that our physical tours translated very well and very directly online, as can workshops and lectures. And in some ways, they work better online. What is very hard to translate from the physical world to an online space is the kind of the networking, the encounters that are serendipitous and this was a big issue for us with running the MUSE-Web conference, that, you know, a lot of the reason why we go to professional conferences is to just run into people and chat with them in the hallways and over dinner or whatever. That's very hard to replicate. And so that was part of the rationale for having a space like the Peale in Second Life, where people can literally go and hang out. But obviously that works best for people who are already there and already do that. It's very, very hard to change people's digital habits. So I would not recommend putting too many resources behind trying to do that unless you're just crazy wealthy as an organization. I think it's better to try to work within what people are already doing and what they understand, than to try to change how they behave. Now, fortunately, Zoom has done a lot of this work for us. So many people have used Zoom now that even folks who consider themselves, digitally illiterate, seem not to be so intimidated about using Zoom. So again, if it works, use it. Don't try to change anybody's habit. I guess that would be my fundamental piece of recommendation.
All right, another question from Emily Perry asking if you have any experience with cellular programs using mobiles as an education and communication tool.
Sure. Well, recognize that the mobile phone, and specifically the smartphone, is the most accessible digital technology that most people own, both financially and just in terms of their familiarity. And of course, smartphones have been critical to providing accessibility for people who are blind, for people who use sign language as their primary means of communication. So, this is, I suppose you could accuse me of being prejudiced. I've been working with mobile for, I don't know, for forever. It feels like, Udi, 20 some years now. But it just works. So go with it. And again, think about, I wouldn't say mobile first anymore, but absolutely everything that you do on the web has to be mobile responsive. And recognize that there are so many different formats in which people access mobile content now. So podcasts, and then there's SoundCloud. And of course there are apps, but with HTML5 now, it's possible to do an awful lot through mobile web apps, basically mobile enabled websites. Of course the sine qua non is that you've got to have internet access though. So one of the really lucky things for me in joining the Peale was, although the building had been abandoned, the city of Baltimore owns it, and there was excellent Wi-Fi throughout the building. And without that, there's an awful lot we just couldn't have done. Similarly, I think we need to be lobbying our cities for citywide Wi-Fi. Particularly during the pandemic, doing things outdoors is a really great way to pivot, a much safer way to get people together. There's a wonderful theater company in Baltimore called Single Carrot that has developed an outdoor performance, a play that happens with your cell phone. And you're there and you're masked, but you're distanced. And so, I just thought that was a fantastic innovation. But again, there's nothing new under the sun. So if you look back at the history of mobile in museums, actually back to the origins of the company that Udi and I used to work for with Antenna Theater, they would create productions where the performers would be silent, huge masks, and the audience the production through radio. And a mobile device that they carried. This was pre-Walkman days even. So looking back to those kinds of strategies, I think is a really rich source of inspiration for today, in terms of how people know how to use their phones. Their phones are safer for them to use than any device that a museum might supply. And it's a really good response, therefore, in this day of pandemic, as well as in terms of bridging the larger sets of digital divides that still plague our unequal society.
Right. So at the moment, I don't see more questions from our participants. So just one question, if not last. Can you think of one or two things, top things, which will make the museums different in 5 or 10 years? How will museums look in 5 or 10 years?
I'll tell you one thing that we're experimenting with that I think is obviously driven by the pandemic, but reflects larger shifts in society. As you know, there's been this explosion of content created in the market, like Netflix and HBO, new TV shows, new movies being created for online audiences. And I mean, I continue to be shocked at how much content is being created and wondering when the market will be saturated. But apparently we're nowhere near saturation. People keep, that is the growth industry right now, is streaming video on demand services. I think that museums need to really recognize that and learn from it and think of ourselves, again, not as treasure houses, but as production houses, where we also can contribute to creating content that people not only want online, but are willing to pay for online as an ongoing revenue stream, both for our institutions and our creators, the artists, the storytellers we work with. So following that logic out a bit further, one of the things that we're experimenting with now in our current exhibition, which is called Inheritance by the artist Kim Rice, was curated by Jeffrey Kent, and it was designed, planned pre-pandemic. And then when the pandemic hit, we were like, well, we can't really safely have people in our building. What shall we do with this show? We decided to go ahead and install it, and we're able to do so with the help of this workforce development program, the AAA Accomplished Arts Apprentices from the G300 Squeegee Squad. But it was installed not with the idea of opening it to physical visitors, but for an online audience. So it's almost like a movie set. We've installed it to be photographed, to be videoed, and to create an online virtual tour. So I think that's perhaps an interesting thing for museums to think about. I mean, you think about the money that goes into creating exhibitions. And often, with the exception of the blockbusters, if you look at the per capita cost for the number of people who actually physically come to see those exhibitions, it can be hundreds of dollars that we've spent for each individual for this one exhibition experience, which they may or may not have liked. They might have thought, gosh, I wish they'd put more benches in rather than, So can we start thinking of exhibitions and indeed our permanent collection displays as something that are transmedia, that start perhaps in the physical world, but are actually aimed at an audience that's mostly online, if not exclusively online? And what then is the long tail of that in terms of educational value and revenue potential?
Wow. Well, that seems very, very interesting. One last minute call for any of our participants, if there's any other questions which was not answered yet. You can speak up, you don't have to write it. You can just unmute yourself if you have a question. One last chance for you.
Question, it's Edna Fast. I wanted to know whether you can provide us with some links to the various projects that you've produced at your museum.
Absolutely, I'll be happy to. I know I had queued up in case we wanted to come to it, a few things that I will put, I guess I can put in the chat right now. We have 2 virtual tours of exhibitions curated by Jeffrey Kent at the Peale. One is Devin Allen, Spaces of the Unentitled. The other is Street Art by Adam Stab. I've just put those links in. You can, of course, visit the Peale in Second Life. Here's the link for that. You can visit our YouTube channel and take a little, what we call a ghost tour by video of the history of the Peale as male and female colored school number 1. And maybe the easiest thing, actually, if you want to get, for example, the link to our upcoming online exhibition for the Kim Rice show, if you subscribe to the Peale, you'll just get our weekly email updates with links to all of our new programs and projects.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you for asking.
Any other question from our viewers, from our participants?
If I may?
Please.
I'm interested to know whether you find some new opportunities in international visitors or international collaboration, through this pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the online audiences that we are attracting now are very international, and you know, our initial partners on those key partners have included organizations like Virtual Ability, which exists really only online in virtual worlds. But I'm very interested in seeing, you know, whether this is going to get museums and other cultural organizations collaborating more online. Even from my days, my early days in the audio tour industry, I saw so much potential for, you know, museums that might have works by the same artist in their collections to collaborate on creating content about that artist. You know, why do we need to replicate the research and the writing to tell the basic biography of Vincent van Gogh, for example, you know? And we never have enough money to create content. So it seems that there should be some really good economies of scale that would also produce better scholarship, frankly, because you know, more researchers and more heads and curators are coming to bear on it. Obviously, I mean, scholars and curators collaborate already, but I think there are ways of making it more explicit. This won't necessarily make it faster, right? Collaboration takes time. The more partners a project has, the longer it's going to take to do it. But I think it's worth it, and in the long term, I would expect to find some really important economies of scale, as well as new uses of that content, you know, making sure that collaboratively created content is always, you know, open source in a sense, that there's the Creative Commons licensing, so that those assets can be open and reused and continue to be developed. Not just by the experts, but by passionate amateurs who often do some of the most important work.
Right. Okay, any other question? Anybody else wants to ask another question for Nancy? All right, seems no. So Nancy, I wanted to thank you so much. It was enlightening. I think it was so interesting for all of us. And I really, really hope that... just a minute. Any other? מישהו רוצה לשאול שאלה? Okay, no. Okay, back to... So I wanted to thank you again so much. I think it was very, very interesting for all of our participants. And I'm sure that they learned a lot. And if not, they are welcome to approach me, or we will also have Nancy's email if you want to reach her to ask more questions. And I wanted to thank Nancy once again for having this session. I'm sure we learned a lot, and I really look forward to having another session like that to continue talking about all the other things we haven't had time to discuss today.
Thank you so much for the invitation, Udi. It's always great to speak with you. And again, please, everyone, feel free to reach out to me. I'll just put my email address into the chat, and you can also find me on Twitter. I don't really do Facebook anymore. So I'll be happy to be in touch further.
Great. Thank you very much, Nancy. Thank you, everybody, and have a good evening. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.